TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby. Happy New Year and welcome to the first TellyCast of 2022. In a packed show to kick off the new year, we find out what 2022 holds in store for the formats and documentary sectors. We'll highlight the latest content industry executive moves in movers and shakers, and we find out what makes sports documentaries so successful. My guests on this week's show are TV consultant Hayley Babcock, co-founder of Alliant content and documentary SVOD Magellan TV, Greg Diefenbach, editor of Television Business International, Richard Middleton, and Windfall Films director, Nick Hardie. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. My first guests on this week's show are TV consultant Hayley Babcock and Greg Diefenbach, Managing Director of Alliant Content. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I'm going to say Happy New Year still. I know that this is like, people may listen to this in months' time. I don't know. But it's the whole Larry David thing of when do you stop saying Happy New Year? Anyway, there we are. We haven't spoken so far this year, so we can say it. Hayley, coming to you first. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin.
So many of our listeners will know you from your time at A&E, but you now set up your a consultancy business. You're based in LA. Tell us a little bit about that consultancy business and what you're up to. Sure.
I had actually started this business several years ago before I was at A&E. A&E Networks was a client, and it morphed into a full-time executive position with them. What I'm doing now is ramping that back up again in a big way. And I'm basically taking the experience that I've had working both in the US and in the international marketplace, in the format industry mostly, and using my unique position, bridging that divide between international and the US markets, and knowing content and production and how to translate that from one sensibility to another, from one structural norm to another, from one budget to another, using my contacts on both sides to make new connections and build new businesses. So I am sort of doing market strategy guidance for several companies overseas that want to increase their footprint or create a footprint here in the US. I'm doing content development support. So there are people who've come to me and said, I have a show, but I don't know that it's a format. Can you help us craft this show into a more repeatable, protectable format? Can you look at our development slate and help us pinpoint what would be the right thing to target into the United States right now? I'm doing some new business development. I'm helping drive format content sales and find production partners for formats from overseas and trying to get those launched, and also working to just directly get some original content sold and produced. And I will then eventually be executive producing those projects when we get them up and running. So it's using sort of all the muscles that I've used in my career and applying them for various clients, both in the US going outwards and outside of the US coming in.
Okay. Oh, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Was it mainly international clients outside the US that you're working with? But it sounds like you've got domestic US clients as well.
I do. I'm working in both directions.
Okay.
Which I love.
Can you tell us who they are? Can you tell us, give us a clue on any of your clients?
Well, I can certainly name a couple of them who have said yes. I can name them, and who I've spoken about before. Two Rivers in Scotland, based out of Scotland. The wonderful Alan Clements runs that production company and has in the past sold individual projects into the US or to US buyers, but he has ramped up the business so much. He works in the scripted space, the factual space, the documentary space, and the entertainment space. So sort of stands on four legs there. And really, though he has agents here who are great and is also partnered with All3Media America in some ways for physical production, which is also wonderful. He really wanted a presence of somebody who is an executive, a creative with relationships who knows the market, who can focus on his US business in a very targeted and focused and continual manner. So I'm doing that with them and I'm loving that work. I also work with Magnify Media, which is a wonderful boutique, but getting larger distribution company. And I'm working on both their scripted and their unscripted formats and finding the right partners and trying to get some of those shows launched. Vincent TV, which is a production company out of the Netherlands, but they also have a presence in Belgium and in the UK. And Vincent is one of the most prolific and respected producers in the Netherlands, is doing a lot of established formats there, but also creating his own IP. And when there are projects that might warrant trying to launch or do business with in the United States, I'm sort of the go-to person for that. Also working with a company here in the United States, helping to sort of gather market intel and trends and give some information to them as they service their clients overseas. And I'm working with an Israeli company, a little bit doing some, they're called E-Tribes, and they've got a whole physical production platform to help producers and physical production entities get all of their information in the cloud and all in one place. So everybody on all their shows and within their company can access information very easily, as opposed to having Excel spreadsheets here and texts there and Word docs over there. And trying to match them up with producers who may not know them. And those are the kinds of things I'm doing.
Yeah, you're pretty busy. Alan Clements was on the show last year, so it was great to have him on. And Vincent Productions would love to have those guys on the show.
I would love to connect you. Be happy to do that.
Please do. Yeah, no, that'd be great. That'd be great. Talking about formats, we're at the beginning of the year, 2022. It's been obviously a strange time, I think, for formats in some ways. I mean, I think COVID has bolstered a number of formats, I think, and perhaps prolonged lives of many formats. Others, maybe other formats that haven't maybe taken off for various reasons. We've seen some really interesting formats come out of South Korea, for example. That's been a super hot territory for the format business. Can you give us some predictions around formats this year as the world and the international format business starts to normalize a little bit more and gets a little bit used to living with COVID? I think business disruption is probably not going to be quite as intense as it has been. What do you see in the year ahead for the formats industry?
I've been asked this quite a lot in the past month, which has been really interesting to really have a think about it deeply. And there are a couple of things that, at the risk of repeating myself in other areas where I've said this, but these are the things I really believe I'm seeing coming, and I would be surprised if they don't come to fruition in some way. I think that in the SVOD space, for these platforms like the Netflixes of the world, I believe subscribers are going to start getting very saturated with the amount of money going out the door and how many services they're paying for. So people are going to start streamlining what they pay for. I think what that will do is cause these SVOD services to not only try and get new subscribers, but to work very hard to hang on to the subscribers that they have and to get really that water cooler show that everybody has to see and everybody wants to talk about. And I think to do something like that quickly, they are going to lean in on formats and getting formats up and running, largely unscripted formats, because those you can get from idea to the screen more quickly than you can scripted. And I think that in hand with the fact that several of them are leaning into their international expansion and doing local productions internationally, when they hone in on a show that works well for them in one territory, they are going to be more likely to do international versions, i.e. formatted versions of those shows in their other territories. And I think that's going to start seeing growth this year for those two reasons.
Okay, so we're talking about these big production hubs that are going to, be in situation for a month or 6 weeks, and then various different territories are going to come in and
Not
shoot their own
necessarily.
show? Okay.
Not necessarily a hub. It might be the Spanish language version of a show that is doing really, really well in the English territories. And they'll do that version in Latin America. They won't necessarily have a hub, but they will repeat, which is the classic definition of a format. They will do a local version of a show that has rules and structure and know-how. So you don't have to start from 0 to get to 100. You start from 50. You get that Bible, you get that know-how, but rather than getting it necessarily from a distributor, they're going to get it from the mothership of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, you name it.
Right.
And do the Norwegian version of it or do the Brazilian version of it.
Interesting.
And it won't necessarily be a hub, but it'll be the formatted version.
So in some ways, I mean, we saw, particularly in the 90s and the 2000s, the growth of some of these mega formats like Big Brother, for example, networks all around the world, really sort of buying into these huge formats. And obviously, some of those are still going and still very successfully. And some of them are actually starting to reboot and pick up momentum again. So you're saying that with SVODs leading into formats, then actually we could potentially see some mega formats within the infrastructure of an SVOD.
I do.
Really going around the world on one through one provider, but the local version of a single provider.
That's right. And I think that opens up, for creative producers who have ideas that could be formats. They're not just going to be pitching those to your classic linear broadcasters, where that linear broadcaster's, distribution arm will take it and roll it out around the world. But they'll be happy to pitch it to an SVOD, and the SVOD may take it for that original territory, but also have the rights to do international versions of it in their other locations.
So how does that work then when it comes to, say I'm a producer, I've got my own format, I go to somebody like Netflix. Netflix loves it and they say, we'd like to take this for the world. Does it work in the same way when it comes to the original producer having a split on each individual territory, or is it a buyout? Does Netflix go, okay, we're going to shower you with money and we've got it for the world, and that's it. You make your original show and we're going to pay huge amounts of money and see you later. We'll do very well.
It's a good question. And it varies. It varies from buyer to buyer. I think it varies from deal to deal. But what I'm learning is they're getting a little bit more flexible, and there is a big upfront piece, and this is your main money that you're making for making this show, but there is some upside for that show traveling. It doesn't work in exactly the same way that it works in the linear broadcast world, but there is some continued upside, some participation in the tail of that program continuing.
Okay. So it sounds to me like a smart producer needs to get a bidding war going between Amazon and Netflix and all of those other SVODs, right?
Hey, a bidding war between anybody is good for any producer, for sure. It can be between the SVOD and the linear broadcaster. Having multiple potential buyers always gives the producer some more flexibility in deal making and usually some more upside, which is great.
Yeah, pushes that price up.
Here's hoping everybody gets that.
Yeah. Fingers
My
crossed.
clients included. Yeah.
Well, I hope you're involved in some of those that we'll see in this year. So you're an advisor to Frapper, Hayley, as well. And we saw some reports recently in the UK trade press about a format dispute between a producer and a network. And it's an area that doesn't seem to get discussed too much. As a board advisor to Frapper, do you get a sense of how common those IP disputes are? And because obviously it often goes unreported by producers. They may have a show in with the same broadcaster, or they may want to pitch a show as a delicate stage of pitching with that broadcaster. So they'll go, oh, maybe we'll stay a bit quiet about it and take it on the chin. Do you get a sense of how common it actually is?
It's hard to answer the how common is it. I find it really difficult to answer. Does it happen? Yes. Has it happened consistently over years? Yes, it has. I think the easier thing to answer is, are there things you can do to try and prohibit it, or to try and rein it in, or to try and do something if it has happened? I think that's probably a little bit easier to quantify. And the answer is it can be difficult. Really, we have this expression in Frappa that we've been, using recently, which is if you see something, say something. It's in the entire industry's best interests collectively to try and keep that from happening, to try and respect IP and the value of IP, intellectual property. You just have to know that it is a very cyclical industry, and nobody is an island. No buyer, no producer, no distributor, no channel is an island. There are always other relationships and other properties that are going to be coming across the desk at some point. And if you start burning, scorching earth where you are now by ripping somebody off, it can come back to bite you later. And I'll give you a funny example from my past. When I worked at what is now Viacom CBS, and Jeopardy was one of the shows that we sold, one of the formats we worked on. And I was at a MIP TV, and some people came into the office where I was, pitching our formats and talking to some producers. Some people without a meeting came in and said, and I won't say from what territory, but it was from a big territory, and a territory that was rather famous at the time for not paying for the rights of shows that they were copying. But they came in, and after King World had become part of CBS, and CBS has this big library of scripted shows and of series and all of this other property that buyers wanted to have, this particular buyer came in and said, "We want to start paying for this show that we've been producing for 4 years without you." Because they knew that now that they had been ripping off King World CBS, and there was a whole library of stuff that they wanted to be able to legitimately get their hands on, they were going to have to stop stealing IP and start paying a format fee. And I think when you realize with consolidation comes bigger players in the pool, you've got to watch your step. And I think if we can all highlight that fact that this may not bite you now, but it could bite you soon, better off not doing it, everybody's going to win.
And that's the case for domestically as well, isn't it? For broadcasters maybe taking a great idea, and I love that idea from that producer, but actually would rather this producer over here actually makes it. So it's not just cross-territory or
no, it's
internationally.
not. That's absolutely right.
Happens domestically as well.
Absolutely. Because that small producer from whom you took it could later become part of a giant group of conglomerate, production entities from whom you want to buy. And if you've burned one of their babies, as it were, it's probably not going to bode well for your business going forward.
Quite right. It's a small industry, isn't it? Getting smaller as well. But Greg, thank you for coming on the show. Welcome to TellyCast. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Justin.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. You're speaking to us from the East Coast, and Hayley's on the West Coast. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from, Greg?
In Washington, D.C.
Right, okay. All right. The home of factual.
For many years. It certainly was decades ago, and there's still a lot of big players.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a bit about Alliant Content, because that's a business that you co-founded. And I've always assumed that you're a distributor, but that's not the case, is it? That's not strictly the case.
No, we're a very particular kind of business. So my background had always been in factual television. And then around 2008, 2009, started to see a major shift in the industry with the rise of video on demand platforms. So my partner, Tom Lucas, and I were talking about this one day and realized that these emerging video on demand platforms were all going to need content. And one of the areas they were eventually going to start focusing on would be documentaries. It hadn't happened yet, but my partner had supplied the first documentary content to a then nascent platform called Hulu. And as you may remember, when Hulu emerged and first came out, there was a lot of head scratching. What is this? How's this going to affect the landscape? We were familiar with Netflix, but this was clearly something a little bit different. And so we formed Alliant Content with a very specific kind of singular mission, which was to bring documentary content, high quality documentary content from all over the world out across these emerging video on demand platforms. And there was one then that was really growing, but we knew there would be many others. And we knew they'd need documentary content. So that's what we did. We formed Alliant Content, and we then developed the expertise to distribute just factual content out across Hulu and other platforms. And we started working with distributors around the world who had content, but didn't really have the mechanisms or pathways to get their content out across these platforms. So Alliant Content is dedicated to just that, distributing high quality documentary content across VOD platforms worldwide. That was the genesis, and that's still really at the core of our mission today.
Okay.
We do it in a lot of different ways now, but that was the original idea.
Is that exclusively to VOD platforms you work with? Do you work with any linear broadcasters, or is it purely VOD?
It's purely a VOD relationship.
Okay, interesting. And now you also run the SVOD. Now we say it probably differently. I'm going to probably say it differently to how you know it. Now, I've always known it as Magellan TV, but
Magellan,
but you say
you can call it Magellan.
It's Magellan. But
I've heard it Magellan, depending on where you are in the world, or Magellan TV, as we say here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so, if you look at the history of Alliant Content, we started back in 2010, distributing documentaries across emerging VOD platforms. And along the way, we realized that we had an opportunity to also create direct-to-consumer relationships so that we weren't only beholden to these platforms, but that we could forge new direct-to-consumer relationships. And so we've done that now with a variety of platforms and products. The flagship would be Magellan TV, the SVOD service Magellan TV, launched back in 2019. We also have fast channels, True Crime Now. We have a war and military channel. And these are just additional ways for factual producers and distributors to reach directly to the consumers.
Okay. I mean, do you commission original content, or is it purely ready-made that you will work on?
We work across the spectrum, from back catalog library that a distributor wants to get in front of an audience, to commissioning original new co-pros, pre-buys. We do about 10 hours a year of in-house production as well, particularly strong in the space science area. My partner, Tom Lucas, has a lot of history there. So if you saw Mars Calling that went out, that was a Magellan TV production. Venus, Death of a Planet, that got some press. That was Magellan TV original production. We just released Search for the Edge of Space in 4K. That was produced by the Magellan TV team. So we work across that whole spectrum. We will work with individual producers, but we also work with large distributors as well. We work with, everyone from ZDF to BBC to Arte. We work with about 45 different suppliers around the world, and they work with our team on a regular basis to identify that content that we think will have the most strength in VOD distribution around the world.
Okay. Now, there are a number of different players in documentary SVOD. How do you stand out then? I mean, because it must be a challenge to compete with a number of these different businesses. Some of them may be much bigger players, for example. I mean, you're going to tell me you approach this in a smarter way, but how do you compete on a level playing field to Discovery Plus or Curiosity Stream or whoever else it might be? How do you take these guys on?
Sure. Well, to remember, of course, Alliant Content's first mission is to distribute that documentary content across all platforms, right? So in some ways, we are agnostic. We will work with anyone to get that documentary content in front of an audience. At the same time, we're also developing direct-to-consumer relationships with specific SVOD products like Magellan TV. So let's focus just for a sec on Magellan TV, because I think your question is great. Yeah, how do you, in this crowded world of content, create any kind of business advantage or a sticky relationship with the end user? And I think the answer in that lies in focusing on the very specific passions and needs of the audience. It used to be that broadcast was just that, right? It was broadcast. It was the lowest common denominator. It was simply the volume of eyeballs. That's all that mattered. And in that quest, channels, linear broadcast channels, cable channels, they didn't want to eliminate anybody. They didn't want to sacrifice a niche appeal for the possibility of alienating any audience segment. They wanted it just to be broad. The technology has changed that game, because now really what we want to do at Magellan TV is focus on the particularly passionate. So we call it Magellan TV worth watching. If you wanted to drill down a little more on that, it's rather geeky, right? We have a rather nerdy service. It is for people who really want to watch secrets of quantum physics and take pride in knowing secrets of quantum physics and being able to tell their friends they watched a cool show about the secrets of quantum physics. That is not a broadcast strategy of old, right? This is an aspirational appeal to somebody who is passionate about a particular segment, whether it's, and we only focus on a few, right? So if you're particularly passionate about science, we're there for you. We'll give you bragging rights in some area of your scientific passion. If you're particularly passionate about history, we've got you. We have the deepest collection of historical programming that you can find. So you're going to find not, some broad historical storytelling that you might have seen on a traditional network, but some particular battle. You want to drill down on Agincourt, something like that. This is going to be more specific. And the technology allows you to do that. And I think that's how we compete and build a relationship with the consumer that's different than the kind of relationship they had with broadcasting of old.
Okay. And actually, you're finding that Netflix is becoming like the broadcaster, because it's offering, all of this really wide range of content from, we'll come on to talk to Nick in a little while about sports docs, but also live sports streaming to drama and movies and everything. This is the power of the niche, isn't it?
I think so. And it's not that you have to necessarily cater to one super tight niche to the exclusion of others, but you do have to have an identity that allows that consumer to feel like they have a relationship with you that's particular, that serves their particular need.
Yeah.
Which is different than an Amazon or a Netflix. They are at such a scale that they need to have something for everyone. They need to be everyone's home. But a service like Magellan TV, which is kind of a heady, geekier niche service, doesn't have that burden. So we have a different kind of relationship with the consumer. And my feeling has, I field a lot of questions all the time with people saying, well, how do you survive in a world where there's, Amazon and Netflix? We survive by not being Amazon or Netflix. We're something different. You can have a relationship with Amazon and Netflix, but still take pleasure in that particular niche relationship you have with Magellan TV.
I think we've all spent our time scrolling through the carousels and looking through, all the depths of Amazon Prime and finding some true crime content there, which, it's almost like blowing the dust off a book in a way, in a digital sense. There's content there that that isn't really getting that much joy. But what you're saying is, if it's on your service, it's given a different focus. By the very fact that it's on your service, it's going to appeal to, it's handpicked by you guys to appeal to your community.
Justin, I think you put your finger right on it, right? It's curation.
Yeah.
It's curation. It's the power of curation. And you think about the evolution of the video on demand industry in the last 7 years. If we'd have been having this conversation 7 years ago, it would have been all about volume. You would have asked questions like, well, how many titles do you have?
Yeah.
And we'd all take great delight in saying we have up to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever the number. That was really kind of the metric of success. Now, today, that what was considered a virtue is now a liability, right? If you've got 50,000 titles, that is the last thing the audience wants to hear. Because my God, the amount of time you're going to spend trying to figure out what to watch is just crushing. And the data around how much time people spend looking for content is ridiculous. I mean, it's like 12, 14 minutes they spend searching around for what to watch.
Yeah.
So clearly there's a curation problem. So if you can offer a service that says to somebody, look, you've spent time with me. I know you, and I will curate for you a meaningful television experience so that you legitimately feel you spent time with television worth watching in areas I know you're passionate about, because we know what you've watched. We know what you've selected, and we can build a tray of historical programming for you to look at. So you have to choose between, the dozen top recommendations we make. Now there's hundreds, if not thousands of other things you can go explore, but we think these dozen programs are really going to scratch your history itch. That's really valuable.
Yeah.
I think that's really valuable. And that's what Magellan TV is about.
Right. And it's probably more valuable to the producer as well, because nobody wants to have their content parked in those dusty shelves at whatever SVOD it is, huge SVOD. They want people to watch their shows, right?
It's a huge problem. Discovery of content is an enormous problem. Now, there's things that are coming on. There's AI that's addressing these issues. We're going to see a big shift in the landscape. My feeling is we're going to see a big shift in the landscape with voice-controlled, voice-activated search. It's going to change that landscape for better and for worse in terms of discovery. But it's evolving all the time. And our job is to make sure that we use these tools to curate the best possible experience for the documentary viewer.
So when we were talking to Hayley earlier on, I asked her about what her thoughts were on key trends in formats this year. So similarly, documentary business in 2022. Do you have any trends, observations, predictions for this year in terms of documentary content for makers and for distributors and for the industry as a whole? Because we were talking before we came on air about we've talked about Real Screen Summit being put back or cancelled or put back to the summer. We've seen NatP cancelled. Seen all of these different events over the years have been cancelled. And one of the beauties of TV events is you get to talk about trends with people, right? You get to sense and see. You get to go and have a look at somebody else's stand and see what they're selling, and think, maybe I need one of those. Do you have any predictions, you think, for the year when it comes to the factual content business?
Well, it's a complex landscape, of course, but let's just make a couple quick observations that will help guide that discussion. One is, it is the golden age of production, right? Documentary television included. You now live in a world where there's massive resources flowing into the creation of the highest quality documentary content, employing technologies we could have only dreamed of 25 years ago when we were shooting 16 millimeter film, at cost levels that have plummeted in terms of what you can achieve for the dollar. So there is a wealth of content. That's the first thing. The other thing, the thing that's the conundrum, is that despite this wealth of incredible content, or perhaps because of it, keeping the loyalty of a viewer is going to be increasingly difficult. They can come, consume spectacular content, they can go away, they can drop your service, they can come back when something else arises. So churn and the fluidity of those relationships is always top of mind for people in the SVOD business. So the trick is, and I think the thing that people are going to be talking more and more about is not only how to create great content, because it all starts there, of course, people want the content, but how do we as platform creators make that relationship with the end user stickier, make it more valuable, make it more so personal, so that you as the viewer feel a sense of connection to the platform, that the platform isn't just a commodity that can be churned out, and I don't care if I'm a member or not a member, but a relationship that makes you feel like you want to be around because it somehow reflects upon you or gives you value in a way that extends somehow beyond just the consuming of a show. And I think that's the mountain to climb. And I think there's going to be a lot more talk about that in the days ahead.
Right. So that's the mountain. And the solution, back to what Hayley was saying, maybe the solution for SVOD is formats, familiarity. I mean, obviously some of those could be unscripted formats. But in terms of the documentary space, do you think we'll see the development of stronger documentary brands, programming brands, do you think? I mean, is that going to be more and more important?
Well, everyone's always going to quest for that. But I don't think that's anything particularly new. What I think the frontier that's more exciting than that is how does the technology, the quickly changing technology, allow for a deeper relationship with the platforms than that we've traditionally imagined. So, think about it this way. In the past, you didn't spend that much. I mean, people spend a lot of time in front of their televisions. But now the amount of time you spend in front of a screen is it's incredible. How much time you're spending looking at a screen. Much of your world is on a screen. A lot of your life is happening in the screen. Well, this is happening for us right now. It's all through a screen. But consequently, what we look to that screen for has to be bigger. We used to look to the screen for entertainment. But now we look to the screen for relationships. We look to the screen for all kinds of information. We look to the screen for kind of personal validation in the exchange. And if we're just providing shows, if that's just what we do, we are not recognizing the moment of what the technology now demands of us and what the consumer can expect from us. They're expecting a lot more of their life to be addressed through the screen. And we as program creators, that's an opportunity for us to build a relationship using these tools that then makes that relationship stickier and the business stronger.
Oh, fascinating stuff. Well, it's going to be a big challenge, as you say.
It is. Nobody has the answer, but these are the kinds of mountains we're going to climb.
And now it's time for Story of the Week, the TV industry news story that's caught my guest's eye in the past 7 days. Hayley, what's your story of the week?
My story of the week kind of dovetails with what we've been talking about so far, interestingly enough, that Paris Hilton has launched a metaverse business. Now, it's not on Roblox. I'm not a big Paris Hilton fan per se by any means, but what is happening is that fame and popularity and brands are moving into the metaverse and functioning there more and more commonly and with more and more success. And I think that goes to something that Greg was saying earlier in terms of making platforms and viewership stickier and using technology and giving people more of what they're coming to screens to get. And Paris Hilton is just bringing her high-end lifestyle into the metaverse and is creating this island where people can go and they can go to concerts and wear clothes and drive cool cars. But if you look at what's happening, generally speaking, in that additional universe that is being created by the new technology, which was just being spoken about, this points exactly to that and the kinds of things that I think people and platforms and brands and producers and creators are going to be getting into. And earlier when we were speaking about format trends, and we didn't get into some of the other predictions I had, but they circle back to this. I think formats and potentially also documentaries and other factual programming and probably scripted programming eventually, although it's a slower cycle, are going to be using more and more experiences of virtual reality baked in, of NFTs being baked into that programming, to that experience, to the story itself, to bringing viewers into experiencing what they're being entertained by and not just watching what they're being entertained by. And, it started with the Fortnites and the Travis Scott and the Ariana Grande concert experiences. I mean, the Travis Scott concert got like 28 million views. I watched it with my, then 14-year-old son and loved it. Actually, it was an amazing experience. And I think entertainment is going to be using those tools to create new kinds of more three-dimensional programming. And I think that story about what Paris Hilton is doing with Roblox just kind of underscores that.
Fascinating stuff. Well, I'll put a link in the episode description to that story, Hayley. And it's so it sounds like it's goggles on for 2022. I mean, I actually just got a Meta Quest 2. I mean, I haven't been able to get it off my kids yet, but by the time when I did, I spent a few minutes on it. It's fantastic. It takes your breath away, and really looking forward to seeing how this develops and what opportunities that brings, not only with virtual reality, but everything else that's involved in the metaverse. Greg, what's your story of the week?
Well, I liked your story a lot, Hayley. I think that ties in a lot with what we're talking about here, about this deepening relationship with content and people's kind of innate desires to connect. I think the story of the week I'll bring is of just all the different articles I've read about the doc shortlist for Oscars. There was so many, it was covered in so many different ways, and and a very high quality list it is. But what I loved about this was just the recognition of the importance and the attention that people are paying to documentaries in general. Documentaries are thriving. They are alive and well. There's enthusiasm about them. If you think back decades ago, some back page in the bottom of the New York Times in some corner, some little documentary shortlist for Oscars. It was nothing. And now it is very much front of mind for people. So I'm going to cite that as the story of the week, just the enthusiasm around docs in general.
No, absolutely. And the mega docs are getting bigger and bigger, aren't they? And the whole sector is really thriving. And now it's time for 2022's first Hero of the Week and Get in the Bin nominations. Greg, who's your Hero of the Week?
Oh, well, I think this is a no-brainer. I think the Hero of the Week is the James Webb Space Telescope. Right here we have the successful unfurling of both the mirror and the sunscreen for what is now the most powerful telescope in the world. It is an incredible human achievement. We're alive to see it. And what we're going to learn in the years ahead, I think, is just going to blow our minds. So we're definitely going to call Hero of the Week the James Webb Space Telescope.
All right. Okay. And well, we want a bit of that in VR, don't we? I think get a bit of VR experience through that thing. That's going to be amazing. Fantastic. How about you, Hayley? Who's your Hero of the Week?
I think my Hero of the Week is posthumously Sidney Poitier. I think we lost a real icon, and an icon for really important reasons. Not only was he just a spectacular presence on screen and a spectacular actor who helped start cracking the ceiling, cracking that cement and glass ceiling, but he was so much more. He was a director, and he was so vibrant and vital, a part of the entertainment community for decades. I think it's a real loss. And he was a real hero.
Yeah, absolutely. He really was. And I was actually watching quite a few videos of tributes to him. And there was a speech at the Oscars Denzel Washington gave a speech, and he was Sidney Poitier was there, who'd actually been up and received an Oscar earlier on in the ceremony. I can't remember what year it was, but that was amazing. Just to see the interaction between those two, and Denzel paying tribute and saying it would never have happened if it wasn't for Sidney Poitier. But yeah, fantastic. Okay, and what about your bin then, Hayley? Who or what is going in your bin?
Very easy.
Okay.
Novak Djokovic.
Oh.
Get vaccinated and get over it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. I think there's this thing is this. I mean, it's an interesting debate, isn't it? I mean, maybe some people say, well, there's no debate. But I think many people would just say, oh, you need choice. It's everybody should have the choice. But if you look at what's going on in France at the moment, the French government are actually trying to, make it law for people are actually being vaccinated. It's a fascinating time. Here's
the thing. In the United States, many years ago, it was not the law that you have to wear a helmet if you're riding a motorcycle in traffic. You'd be out on a dirt road all alone, whatever. But if you're on a highway, a freeway, I need you to wear a helmet, not so that you don't die. If you choose to die on a motorcycle because you're not wearing a helmet, yes, that's your choice. The moment you stop short and I'm behind you and hit you and I cause you to die and you force me to kill someone is the moment where the law needs to require you to wear a helmet, because it's not just about you anymore. It's about what you're doing and how it affects all of these people around you. And it is exactly the same thing with the vaccinations.
Yeah, in the bin.
And so
in the bin.
Novak Djokovic.
In the bin.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Double fault for Djokovic there. Greg, how about you? Who's going in your bin?
Well, in a similar vein, my in the bin was Omicron in general. Here we were on the verge of thinking perhaps we were going to resume life as something close to normal, only to find that our houses are still filled with children who can't go to school and events we can't attend and relatives who are catching the virus. Fortunately, it does not seem to be nearly as deadly and consequential, at least in my limited experience of friends and family who now have it. But boy, it's been a cold start to 2022.
Yeah. I mean, I was speaking to somebody the other day and was just saying, has everybody in the TV industry got COVID at the moment? I mean, it seems that way, doesn't it? I mean, it's frightening, but as you say, fingers crossed, but it doesn't seem anywhere near as dangerous as Delta or any of the early variants were. But hopefully this will be the year that we can actually crack it and get over it. And by the end of this year, we can, look back, hopefully, at coronavirus as a whole, but or at least learn to live with it. Greg, Hayley, thank you so much for joining me this week. I've really enjoyed our discussion. You can check out the episode descriptions for the links for the stories that Greg and Hayley outlined. Thank you again. We'll see you on a screen, no doubt, rather than in person for the next few months. Who knows? Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. Thanks for joining me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you for having us. Good to spend some time with you.
My next guest on this week's show is Nick Hardie, director of the new feature documentary film, The Wall, Climb for Gold, coming out on Apple TV Plus and lots of other streaming services. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us about this film, The Wall, Climb for Gold. Tell us about the film, first of all, and how it came about.
Myself and Windfall Films, we set about wanting to make a story about female rock climbers, and we gained access to 4 of the world's best rock climbers. The film is about their journey to the fabled 2020 Olympics. You know, that in itself, it was the first time that rock climbing was going to be part of the Olympics. And that in itself provides, its own raft of challenges, obstacles for these sports women. I started filming this in 2019. 2020, the pandemic hit, as we all know. And that and the Olympics were postponed. And so that provided for them, unfortunately, a whole nother layer of kind of life challenges and obstacles for them to overcome mentally, physically. Film evolved into a 2-year project that was really looking at the kind of emotional, human, personal stories of these 4 women as they fought to overcome their demons. both physically and mentally, and ultimately to achieve their goal of getting to the Olympics.
I mean, it must be the case for many documentary makers that the film that they set out to create, the one that actually they produced, is very different because of COVID, right? And that lends its very own impact into a feature doc like this. So you set out creating, so there's basically you say there's 4 professional female rock climbers, which, obviously we're seeing, which is great. We're seeing, a real explosion in interest of women's sport and elite sport for women. And obviously, as you said, lots of new sports being featured in the Olympics every time the Olympics comes around. So tell us about these 4 sportswomen and basically how you came about focusing on the 4 that we see in the film.
So the first that I'll mention, Janja Garnbret from Slovenia, is considered by many as to be sort of pound for pound the greatest rock climber of all time, male or female. She's sort of a talent like no other, a real kind of prodigy. And then we have Miho Nanaka from Japan, who is definitely one of Japan's best, has been for a long time, rock climbers, but also somewhat of a rock star over there. She's sort of a, David Beckham type level celebrity over there, and a really incredible talent. I think we also followed our own Shauna Coxey from the UK, who is a bit of a legend of the sport. She's been around for a very long time on the scene and was sort of at that very, experienced level of her career. And then Brooke Rabutu, who is our 4th rock climber, she is from the USA. When we first started filming with her, she was 18. And so right at the beginning of her career, and kind of looking up to the other 3 as her idols, really. So a really kind of fascinating cross-section of women in the sport, and a mixture of the kind of latest and, next generations of women to be pushing the sport to where it is today.
I mean, rock climbing is something that is, obviously fairly niche. And I think a lot of people look at rock climbing and particularly some of the really crazy El Capitan type expeditions and climbs that people do, which is, you look at them there, you think people are absolutely crazy to do that. And there's a commercial circuit, isn't there, for climbing now? Companies like Red Bull and various other businesses, sponsors, huge amount of sponsorship. And we see some clips in the film of this competitive climbing in arenas with thousands of fans, which is really, which was a real eye-opener for me. How popular is rock climbing in terms of, creating a film like this for a market around the world? There's a challenge and the emotional challenge and the sporting challenge around a film, but obviously creating a film that's going to have a market, how big is it around the world?
It's a good question. It's one of those sports that I guess professionally, so in terms of the competition element that you're talking about, it's sort of less than a decade old in that sense. But the outdoor rock climbing element has been around since I think the 40s, 50s, etc. In a kind of broadening sports sense. The indoor climbing element is something that is obviously where the natural sort of progression to the competitions lies. And so the women that we follow in the film, that's where they train, that's where they do a lot of their sort of day-to-day climbing. But then there's this brilliant connection with the outdoors. They all, it's where the sport stems from, and it's where they all, in their own words, kind of yearn to be. They have to do the kind of outdoor side of it slightly less because they have to focus on the more controlled indoor environments for their training and for the competitions. But like I said, there's this kind of great innate connection with the outdoors and rock climbing outdoors, which is kind of a natural part of what they do. But in terms of, your question about the popularity of it, the indoor element in the UK, for example, is increasingly popular. And, you can see it in rock climbing gyms in every major city in the UK now. And in certain countries, it's incredibly popular. Like Japan, it is literally in every single town that you go to, there'll be a climbing gym. It's absolutely everywhere. In the States, it's very popular. So now it's just exploded in the last few years. And obviously, as soon as the Olympics were announced, and there was this natural progression towards the Olympics, the sport has just completely exploded. There's a big audience for it now, and it's yeah, it's an incredible sport. You should try it if you haven't already.
Yeah, well, my daughter actually goes to one of these clip and climb
There you go.
franchises that you see around the UK, which she loves that. So I can sort of see this really burgeoning as a sport. How about the technical aspects of shooting rock climbing films? Presumably, you've got some amazing rock climbing cameramen on your crew. So just tell us about what the challenges are to make a film 50 feet up or maybe more hanging by a rope.
I guess sort of firstly, you come back to what we were saying. The division, I guess, between indoor and outdoor requires a very different filmmaking approach. If you were making something like Free Solo and The Dawn Wall, almost all of your time is going to be focused extremely high up and hanging from, very dangerous heights. With this, because their lives, with The Wall, these 4 women, their lives revolve around, like I said, a great portion of indoor and then some elements of outdoor throughout each year, which, they often use as a kind of solace, I guess, to take them away from the indoor competition environment. Yeah, so in terms of how we filmed that over the 2 years, a large portion of that was indoors. And whether it's bouldering, so without ropes, or lead climbing with ropes, you can do a great deal of that from the ground or from, raised levels within the indoor climbing gyms, arenas, wherever it might be. That you can actually do with a relatively, skeleton crew, as long as you know what you're doing. And you might need a harness, you might not, or you might need to be up on a platform, you might not. That's actually quite controllable. And then obviously when we stepped outside for the big kind of set pieces that we did with most of these women at key points throughout the year, that's when you expand your crew and you have, you need a DOP crew. You need a DOP on ropes, you need a drone crew, and you need to be able to see something like that from as many different angles as you can to kind of take in the scale of it more than anything else. If you do everything from the ground, you'll get couple of shots and it's only going to serve the purpose of that beginning of the climb. The rest of it, you need to be up on the ropes next to them, or you need to have a drone crew that can take in the expanse of the landscape. That was kind of what we did. We expanded when we needed to. As you say, we did have DOPs that went up on ropes, and I was kind of directing from the ground and getting the ground level shooting where need be, and then drone crew getting the broader expanses. So yeah,
and that's presumably across 4 locations, right? So Slovenia, UK, US, and Japan.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's kind of a key scene that is in both the trailer and in a key moment for Yanya, where we went with her to Spain. She was climbing in this area of Catalonia, which is one of the best in the world. Yeah, and so for that, we took a big crew with us. We had some of Spain's best rock climbers who were our safety guys, and also kind of helping to coordinate the shoot up on the walls. So that was a kind of a big scale affair. But I also did one with Brooke, for instance, in Colorado, and for that she was bouldering. So again, it's not crazy heights, but you are in this stunning landscape. So we didn't need rope access crew for that. I was able to do a lot of that from the ground, but then you also, still need a drone crew to sort of take in that expanse and that landscape and to make that, a kind of a character in its own right. So the beauty of it is that it is quite flexible, and you can shrink down or expand your crew depending on exactly the type of climbing they're doing and exactly the environment.
Well, let's take a little listen to The Wall Climb for Gold.
This will always be climbing's first Olympics, and like the 4-minute mile, climbing Everest, the people that did it second can always say they did it, but they'll never be first. Climbers have got to slay all the dragons.
My biggest obstacle is my mind. My perfectionism can destroy me.
And so this show, when's it out, and how can you access it?
So it's going to be out on the 18th of January on Apple TV+.
Sports documentaries are really having a bit of a moment, aren't they? And, incredibly popular. And we've seen, obviously, a lot of this popularity driven by SVODs in terms of one particular genre, obviously drama. But I've seen sports docs becoming real behemoths, juggernauts that have also really opened up access to a lot of these great sporting institutions, clubs and teams and what have you around the world. Now, you've directed many of these at the absolute top level, All or Nothing Brazil, but also F1 Drive to Survive. Tell us about that one, because to me, F1 Drive to Survive, I mean, I've kind of watched F1. I've been a bit bored with it over the last few years. It's kind of, I watch the start of the race if I'm in, and then kind of I'll sort of drift off and do something because Lewis Hamilton's going to win. And that's about it. But actually, Drive to Survive is something that really opened up the personalities in the team, not only the drivers, but also the key principles around the teams and other personalities. And for me, it's really rekindled my interest in Formula One. And I'm sure it has. And obviously, I'm sure that was something that was the objective of the Formula One organization, to do that. So tell us about how you put that together, because it was the first series you directed.
That's
wasn't
right.
it?
Yeah. I guess like with all of these things, all these kind of access docs, you have a hierarchy of access that you will go through right from the get-go. And, sport in particular has a very obvious hierarchy. So you'll get access initially with the governing body of that sport. And then, that will trickle down to access to the teams, if you can negotiate that. Further on, then to the coaches, and then the players, sports people, whoever that might be. And so that's what we did certainly with Drive to Survive. There was an agreement in place with F1, but actually the access that you then develop is evolving throughout your time filmmaking. So over that year that we spent on the first series, that access evolved. And I know the guys who are, still making the later series now, and the access is in an even better place now because they've had that sort of 4 years to evolve it even further. So it's one of those things that ultimately the success, of the film, of the series is.
It opens up access. It must open up its own access, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, with the teams and the principals, and were they quite suspicious of you to begin with when you've turned up in the pit lane on day
always,
one? Or
always. Yeah, because you're a new entity and you've got nothing to show for a track record, an example of what it might be that you're trying to achieve, and words will only go so far on those first meeting. So it really is about trust and about time, like with all of these things. And the longer you have, the better, of course. And also just the more you can put into those relationships with whether you're buttoned on or with the camera off, whatever it might be, like the more you put into those relationships and the time that you have with them undoubtedly kind of forms the success or failure of the film or the series. And that was true of true of The Wall in the same way. I think going back to what we were saying, the pandemic in a strange way, one of the only sort of positives, if I can say that, benefits that came out of the pandemic was that additional time, that additional year meant that I had all that extra time to develop my relationships with them, for them to trust me. And it's only at that point do you get invited into those very personal moments that make for a powerful, compelling storyline.
Yeah. As I was saying earlier on, the huge popularity of sporting feature docs now. Why is that? What makes them so popular, do you think?
Sport has always shown us the possibilities of the human potential, and it always will have naturally those kind of really powerful story arcs, the extreme highs and the extreme lows. It can be the epitome of glory, or it can be very unforgiving in its own right. So you have that framework, and that's always going to be an exciting, compelling thing. But I think the challenge now, because of its popularity and the success of all of these sports docs, the challenge is authenticity, as it is with so many documentaries, but particularly in this case, because as you say, because the awareness that everybody has now of the kind of thing that they might expect presents its own challenges. Yes, it might get you access in certain situations, but at the same time, they are so aware of how they will appear on camera, and they will consider that when you film them. So it's that challenge for authenticity is one of the sort of biggest concerns always.
The work that you've done on Drive to Survive is fantastic. Congratulations on that. And obviously, congratulations on The Wall Climb for Gold, which is coming out 18th of January on Apple TV+. Nick, thanks for coming on the show. Really enjoyed speaking to you.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, it was great speaking to you too.
My final guest on this week's show is TBI editor Richard Middleton, who's back with another Movers and Shakers to kick off the new year. Hi, Richard. How's things at TBI Towers?
Hi, Justin. Very good, thank you. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all your listeners. Yeah, we are we're back and raring to go. Yeah, it's been a busy week, this one so far. I think everyone eased in a little bit last week, but everyone's gone, all guns blazing this week, and looking forward to 22 and hopefully, lots more travel and meetings with people and face-to-face interactions and cocktails on sunny beaches, perhaps.
I'd hope so. Richard, because we've missed that, and I know that you were heading out to Miami later this week, or your plan was, as was I, to go to NAPI. But obviously, we've seen that hot on the heels of Real Screen Summit being postponed to June. NAPI Miami's not happening.
I know, it's a shame, isn't it? It's all a little bit reminiscent for myself of sort of late that March period of 2020 when there were all these events planned, and then one by one they sort of tumbled by the wayside. But it was a shame because, especially on this side of the pond, at least in Europe, it's always nice to go to Miami in January and get some of that Florida sun. But hopefully, fingers crossed, sort of give it 2 or 3 months, and perhaps the Omicron variant can get settled down a bit and things become a little bit more stable. But I think it kind of makes sense that the event was cancelled, given and the other events as well, of course, too, just because international travel still such a challenge for so many people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle you have to piece together to make sure you get your test. Is it the right test? Is it antigen test? Is it PCR? Is it you have to book it 24 hours in advance? Will that still get me on the plane? All of that stuff. You're not even on the plane yet. Anyway, there we are. I suppose, well, we look at it. We're not emitting any carbon emissions then, I suppose, on our. So I think we probably have to be thankful for.
Indeed.
How about TBI this year, Rich? What's going to be your focus over the next few months?
Well, at the moment, we're sort of looking ahead. So we're obviously busy planning sort of what we're going to do for the second half of the year. We've got most of what's planned for the first 6 months in the works. So we're doing lots of stuff on the London Screenings magazine that we're going to be putting together. So back end of last year, we saw a lot of the production companies and distributors sort of getting more involved. So we had the sort of the big guys involved previously, but we've seen sort of a coming together of all the UK based operators anyway and distributors really getting behind London Screening. So I think this year, again, obviously with a massive disclaimer that over what might happen with COVID, but hopefully it should be a really sort of energetic, vibrant event. And yeah, we've got a magazine that we're putting together, loads of great stuff in it, lots of great interviews, UK focus obviously, but very much looking to what UK is doing for, with global partners. So that's kind of, that's the focus at the moment. And it's been a busy start to the year as well, as we'll discuss, no doubt. There've been lots of sort of appointments, commissions have been going out as well. And obviously we've seen some big news, the CW over in the States and that potentially being up for sale. So it seems the industry's back with a bang, and we're raring to go.
It's interesting what you're saying about London Screens, because I guess now distributors are now going to feel a little bit what it's like to be an event company, an event producer in their own right, because they're going to have to decide whether or not they're going to go ahead. I mean, as we are, we're about 6 weeks away. I think first week in March, the London Screens event. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, all their international buyers coming in, whether they'll be able to make it or not.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting. I mean, obviously, BBC Studios they went really early last year, saying that they were going to do a virtual showcase this year. So they've sort of already set out their stall. So it will be interesting to see what the distributors decide to do. I mean, I guess they're their events tend to be smaller anyway. It's not, it's not thousands of people going to the Palais or something in Cannes. It's smaller get-togethers, but it's that aspect of sort of international travel and whether or not the buyers will be prepared to make the trip.
A lot of them have invested in their own screening platforms, so I suppose they've got that to fall back on if they need to. Well, welcome back, Richard. You've been on the show a number of times with movers and shakers. Bring us up to date with the most notable executive moves that you've seen in the new year.
Yeah, it's been, as I say, it's been a busy one for exec moves. We've had, there was obviously quite a lot of sort of M&A activity and restructuring going on last year, and we're still seeing some of the ramifications of that, and obviously the shift to streaming and those streamers going global. So we've had, Warner Media, probably one of the standout appointments recently was Warner Media hiring Jason Montero from Shahid, which is the Middle East-based streamer, which has got lots of money behind it. It's done very well in sort of its international operations. Jason's going to be heading up. Well, he's been hired for HBO Go, I think, initially. So he's going to be head of or GM for Warner Media in Southeast Asia, working on HBO Go, which will eventually become HBO Max. But a really interesting appointment. Says a couple of things. Obviously, HBO Go is essentially the streamer that Warner Media operates out in Southeast Asia, and it will at some point, I think, probably become HBO Max, but there's no date on that just yet. But it sort of points to the direction of travel. Jason, again, quite an interesting appointment. He used to work at Shahid, as I say, and obviously HBO Max International is run by Johannes Larcher, who also headed up Shahid. So there's some continuity in the execs working together there. A little plug for TBI as well. We had a really interesting chat with Johannes last year discussing what HBO Max are doing outside of the US, and he's got huge plans. They've got a big machine behind them, obviously. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what Jason does in HBO Max and in Southeast Asia. Also interesting to note that he was director of AVOD at Shahid. So again, got lots of experience on the AVOD side. Perhaps that points to where Warner Media might see some potential for Max in Southeast Asia.
Now, also, there's some movement over at Roku, isn't there?
Yeah, another AVOD one. We've been banging on about AVOD for a long time. I think it is beginning to really sort of get some momentum behind it. But this is a sort of veteran of the company, Scott Rosenberg. He's SVP and GM of platform business at the company. He's been with Roku, I think it was since 2012, so it's been a good decade. Took up his most recent role in 2017. And he was, if you remember back, Roku did that deal with Quibi. If you can stretch your mind back to last year and the year before, Quibi was the short form streamer that sort of blew up in quite spectacular style. Roku picked up, I think it was about 75 shows from Quibi, and Scott was the man behind quite a lot of that deal. So he is, his next move isn't known, but again, an interesting sort of transition for Roku, and it'll be interesting to see who they bring in on that front.
Yeah, and it'd be also interesting to see where he resurfaces, but I'm sure you'll be following that one closely.
Absolutely, yep. Always sniffing around, to see the next move.
Yeah. Okay, what about ITV Studios Global Entertainment? I guess there's been moves there as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So last year, if you can remember, Martin Mice, who's well known in the business, obviously, he moved across to John de Mol's Talpa in October. He became CEO over there, leaving a gap at ITV Studios Global Entertainment. So Arjan Pompa, he has now been appointed MD with immediate effect. He was already COO, and now he has been running the business jointly with Kim Dingler. Kim will continue in their role as CCO, and Ian has been promoted to MD. So big focus on formats. Obviously, ITV Studios, they've been really pushing the studios side of the business recently. Lots of sort of presentations to the market, and really trying to sing the praises of the creative side of ITV's international operation. So Ian will be looking to flog. I think they've got about 300 formats. All the big ones: The Voice, Love Island, The Chase, I'm a Celebrity. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how he expands the reach of ITV Studios Global Entertainment's format business.
And we've seen Asasha appointing a Canal Plus group exec.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I included it in our little rundown because Sasha's been a real sort of vibrant player in the business over the last 12 months or so. It was set up, it's got some big names behind it. So former Endemol Shine exec Marina Williams and Zodiac Media execs Gaspar de Chavannes, those guys set this company up. It's been very acquisitive over the last couple of months, and Alban de Noirmont has been now appointed as head of mergers and acquisitions and strategy at the company. So it's, not necessarily, it's not sort of a content appointment as such, but it will be interesting to see what Alban does in terms of looking to buy companies. They've made some really big moves at Sasha. They acquired Cabot Family, the French scripted firm behind Meeks, which was on Amazon. And then probably for a lot of UK listeners, the big one that they did was take control of Red Planet Pictures, which is the company behind Death in Paradise, of course, and they also now own the company behind Dr. Foster, Drama Republic. So they're quietly, or not so quietly, making some real moves into expanding their business. And it'll be quite interesting to see what Alban does. Previously at Canal Plus, he was working in strategy and M&A as well, working for both French and international activities around the world, basically. So, I think we can definitely expect to see him, lead on some more acquisition for Sasha.
Yeah, so more M&As to come from Sasha. So that'll be interesting to see who Alban puts in his shopping bag over the next few years. And to round things up, Abacus have made a hire as well.
Yeah, this is a nice one. I mean, Abacus, they've done very well, really. I mean, launching out of they launched just at the start of the whole COVID outbreak back in 2020, Jonathan Ford's company. They've hired former UK TV and Sky exec Charlie Chalambous. He's going to be heading up all their acquisitions activity, based out of London. He's got a background that perhaps points to what Abacus is looking for. I mean, Abacus initially were quite focused on unscripted factual content, but they've more recently been moving into scripted as well. And Charlie has a background in that. He was responsible for acquiring and investing in programming for UK TV's networks. So those include Alibi, Dave, and Yesterday. And he also worked across BBC Studios global channels as well. But looking at some of the shows that he's done deals for, so Father Brown spin-off Sister Boniface Mysteries. There's the crime drama Miss Scarlet and the Duke, Beta Films Hudson and Rex. So obviously he's got a good history of spotting these scripted series. So I think we can definitely expect to see Abacus making more moves on that front fairly soon with Charlie in the hot seat.
Abacus moving into scripted. Interesting stuff. Richard, thank you so much for joining me. Fascinating to hear that, quite a lot of activity first week in the new year. A lot of moves, which is often the case when January comes round. But love to have you back on the show at some point soon to give us a bit of an update. And let's hope those cocktails and those sessions that we're talking about, seeing each other in person. Maybe it's going to be MIP TV, going to be Cannes next time, we think, maybe?
I think so. I reckon you're probably right, yeah. So, fingers crossed, we can if we can just sort of, muddle our way through until then, and hopefully we can, reconvene in person on the Croisette, perhaps, and enjoy a cold one.
Yeah, let's get this winter behind us, and I'll see you there. Richard, thanks so much for joining me. All the best, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Justin.
Well, that's about it for another week's TellyCast. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. We've got a brand new website, TellyCast.com, that includes exclusive feature content from TV's opinion leaders and journalists. This week's articles include a piece from Evan Shapiro on how fractured viewing is impacting public empathy, a Q&A with Gary Carter on the legacy of Big Brother, and Tim Dams reports on the latest developments as COVID continues to impact the world's TV markets and festivals. They're all free to access, just sign up on the website to read them. And why not sign up for our free newsletter, TellyCast Plus? You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next week's show, as always, stay safe